Hi, Ken Lasseson here. I wrote and maintain the Microbiome prescription website. This is the third of a series looking at a specific autism child. Autism is of special interest to me since I happen to be high functioning autism spectrum. And I have since early days seen people with more severe autism and have great empathy for them. So autism is special interest, which is why I have done this series separately from my other series and kept it focused. This is for one particular 3-year-old boy, and the mother has supplied a good hunk of medical reports which I made use of, and it has become a bit of an interesting investigation. So, video 1 basically reviewed the data, which include hair analysis, organic acid, toxic non-metal, blood work, etc. Video 2, we use our database to try to identify root cause bacteria for the abnormal results from those other labs. That is, labs reported this. Can we find an explanation with the microbiome, the gut bacteria, causing that? And we produce a list of hand-picked bacteria from there. If you have a sample and you log in, hand-picked bacteria shows up there if you have any. In this case, we can go and review the subset which we have selected, which is there, the bacteria, the count, which is count out of 1,000,000, and examples what other people have for the same count, so you can see what direction your values are compared to everybody else there. So that's what the outcome of our second lesson was. This third video is trying to cook up a stew to adjust the bacteria, tossing in certain things with the hopes of shifting the bacteria in the direction we wanted to, based on the premise that the bacteria is causing the symptoms, and there's evidence in multiple areas from anxiety to insomnia that correcting the bacteria shift improves the symptoms or reduces the severity of symptoms. So we are basically going to go through 6 things quickly, using outliers only for end products, enzymes, and modulars. Quick suggestion, quick review of what it suggests, canned filtering, hand-picked bacteria, which is what we have done here, and we will actually add a few more items from the canned filtering, from the first item from the end products. We're looking for outliers. Sorting out the situation with probiotics. Some probiotics are good, some are not. And then comments on trying to figure out what you will end up doing from all the information. You may have information overload, and the question is how to resolve it. You may need to talk to your MD to be aware of plus or minuses of it. I'll explain the framework which I would use for making the determination. Okay, the suggestion basis, I should explain. Suggestions are just that, suggestions. They are things which I perceive to have increased odds of causing the desired effect. They are all based on studies on PubMed. There are a few odd exceptions here and there, but generally I try to keep to that as a gold standard. Typically, the studies report that the average between a control group and a target group changes, and the change is statistically significant. Sometimes some of the weaker or less well done studies is a before and after. People had this before, they were given something, they have this after. There was no control group with it. Technically, it is a not as well done study, but we can still use that information because what we're trying to do is simply get as much information to improve the odds of understanding what is likely to happen. When there is detailed reporting, I should point out, often some of the people have opposite shifts. Bacteria is complicated and there's a lot of interaction and no one size fits all, and that's what basically happens. So Some of the suggestions may not work. They may work very differently. What we have tried to do is have one which has very good odds of working how we expect. The direction of the shift can be opposite for control and for diagnosis. I remember reading one study where something was given and the control, a particular group of bacteria, increased. For those with a particular medical diagnosis, the number decreased. My assumption is that if you're using it, you're dealing with some sort of condition, some sort of diagnosis. So when I have a case study where things go in two directions, usually what I record is the direction which happens for those who have a diagnosis, because chances are that it's a better match to you, the user, than a healthy control. After all, if you're healthy, why in the world are you watching this video? So we are going to first look at using outliers only. I got to this point in the last video and hit the page and suddenly realized, wait a minute, I had forgotten to revise those pages, so I'm going to flip over there. And the purpose of this is, if no labs are available, remember, so far we've been working out a bunch of external lab reports and trying to pick bacteria based on those labs. Suppose we have no lab reports at all, and we want to try to identify things which are high or low, and this is what I'm going to take a look at in terms of three things: high and low according to what products they produce, what enzyme they produce, and which parts of the keg molecules are missing. There may be many or very few coming out. I've seen some where it literally goes on for pages of items, other cases where there's nothing. Person would appear to be absolutely healthy, may not be, but there's nothing which we can spot or identify in terms of the microbiome. So let's flip over to the sample page again. On the menu, there's a changing your microbiome, and we have three items here. We have end product outliers, which will go and identify things where the values are high, and in this case, all those values are high, as in the person is sitting at the 99th percentile, a very high amount. If we go and click on this one, it will open up in a new Windows and will show what is producing it. In this case, what we find is that although the count is high, you will look at it and say, but why is it high? After all, it has lactobacillus. Well, actually, the lactobacillus is the problem. The amount of lactobacillus is very much higher than what is normal. What is particularly interesting is that we don't have any particular breakdown as to which lactobacillus, but lactobacillus at a genus level is abnormally high. As you, if you look at the numbers here, it is above the 93 percentile, and not everybody has it, so it is a very high amount. So we put a check mark here, click that, which now adds it, just to illustrate again, to our taxonomy thing, and here we have it as a genus, and down below we have all the individual species which we identified earlier. Okay, so let's resume with back to here. Next, let's take a look at the next one in the list. And again, we'll click on it and see what it takes. And guess what? We have the same culprit, lactobacillus. And we try this one. And again, lactobacillus. It happens to produce all those end products. Lactobacillus. Okay, let's try niacin. Here we have a bit more than before. And we go and we take a look down the list, and this one here I'll mark because it is high. The Bacteroids one I tend to avoid because the name is used twice and sometimes the data gets misassigned to the wrong thing. But selecting that one is high. The only other one which is high, is really high, is the Blottia, which is a third of that, and everything else is below the third level, so I'm going to just mark that one. We go back and we'll go to the next one. And we have the Bacteroids as before. We have this one, which again we had before. Lactobacillus is there. Rhinococcus is there. So again, there's nothing new there. And here what we have, again, we have Lactobacillus and the same two which we have already added in, so there's no purpose to add more in there. Go down for the next one, over. And here we have a whole bunch of species specified, and what we find here is why the Lactobacillus is overgrown. It is a specific species of Lactobacillus which is far in excess of everybody else. If you take a look at most of these other numbers, they're all within range. Just one particular species is where the problem is. One specific species. Okay, so, and Bifidobacteria, we have a high count for the genus, but when we look at what the labs breaks down the genus is, we discovered that the numbers down below comes nowhere near that. In fact, what we are seeing is that the Bifidobacterium, which are not identified at the species level, but is identified at the higher level, the genus level, is a significant contributor. So we're going to simply add that into a list and return back, and we end up with the last one, vitamin K. And again, we have Bifidobacteria, Lactobacillus, and that's basically it. This one is 25%. I like to keep it about 35% or more, so we won't put that one in. And now we are done. We have done all the end products outliers. We'll move on and see if we have any KEGG modular outlier. We have one outliers, and that is basically vitamin B12. And we see we have more B12 being produced than almost anybody else in our 1400 samples. So we click that to find out what produces it. And over here, we can go and click the count to get from high. And now we have absolute explicit. We have Bacterium vulgaris. So now we are at species level, and species is what we really want to get down. Another one here, which we have actually added, but I'm going to re-add it here. And then everything else is much less, as in below, we want things to be at least 1/3 of the max number. And 1/3 of that is about 60, so we could or could not, depending on your preference, include that. I'm going to include that. And now we go and add that in. Let's take a quick look at hand-picked bacteria again. Our list is getting bigger. We have a few genuses, and everything else is at the bacteria, at the species level, which is a good state to be in. So returning back to here, we'll look at the enzymes. And we have enzymes. We have a very low amount, but over here is something important. It's rare. Most people have none of it. And you have a little bit of it, and a very little of the little bit of it is probably not going to be significant. And generally my attitude is to say, now we are doing too much what ifs, and we are over reading information in. Okay, so that now means we have gone through the outliers, and we have increased our pick a bacteria to a bit bigger than it was before. So what's next? The next item we're going to do is try to get suggestions of what we should be taking or not taking, etc. And our first set of suggestions is quick suggestions, and these are based on recommended range from Jason in Tasmania, Australia. I've met with him, we have gabbed, and basically from his clinical experience he finds certain ranges seems to be the magic, which is not needed. On the left we have the values. You see there's a whole bunch of not ideals. For example, lactobacillus, somewhere between 0.01 and 1. We are sitting up at 6. So we are well beyond his ideal range for this particular one. This one, another one, his range is 10 to 15. We are 16, so we're a bit high in that one. And we have already picked that one out by other method. Rhinococcus is okay. Roseburia is low. Nothing which we have done picked that up as being a potential problem. Just one, again, his recommended level is 0.0001 to 0.02. We are 0. Whether or not it's ideal or not, or whether or not it's a problem with the lab not measuring any of this particular genus is disputable. I'm not too concerned about this. This one we hit on. Bifidobacterium is not ideal. It is low, and we saw we have a fair amount, but most of those we have seems to be from an unidentified species, or at least are not detected species by the lab. So that is a bit of concern. Bacteriologists we kept coming across, and we are very high there, and we actually identify a specific species in that, which is high, which is good. So now we know what it is. And bacteroids is part of this class, and it's the same problem, except you have a much more tolerance from 20 to 35. But just one particular species is so out of whack, we have a problem. So let's go over and just take a look at where we find this information on the site and where we get suggestions from it. So again, changing your microbiome, it is under health analysis, which does a variety of ways of trying to estimate the health. And right here is the one which I'm referring to, which is right now pretty good. Other things are experiments of trying to tease information from the data which we have. And then down at the bottom, it has unhealthy ones. And generally, my criteria suggests that is we want to have at least 1,000 before you really pay much attention to it. And we do find one which is the Bilotia protea, which we do have detected by the other process. And this one is connected with body fat, blood pressure, etc. And it's a genus level species, again, what we tend to want to focus on. So there are other things, so we could add some of those into our handpicked taxonomy if we want to, but there's not a need. Again, same thing up here. You can go and pick specific things and add in if you are hand building things. At the moment, let's just leave things as they are. We can always come back and explore different paths. There are a lot of different paths. I'm sorry, but that's the reality of life. So we have quick suggestions. We go here, and voila, we see here is everything which is being identified coming through, and everything is pre-filled, including what is being looked at and what is not being looked at. And what we have here is we have things which is suggested to increase: cranberry flower, green tea, iron, couple of particular probiotics, food, probiotics, etc. So all of these are things that will have an impact on causing those shifts. Items to start is we have Lactobacillus plantarum, which is a different probiotic, which we should cut back fat, resveratrol, etc. And then we have below a list of existing probiotics which have nothing but the good probiotics in it. And we have a small list. Then we have a big list of mixed impact, which generally means you're flipping a coin. No known impact is probably far safer to do than mixed impact if you want to do some. And then we have flavonoids foods. We have thyme, dates, etc., bananas. And then we have folate being suggested as a supplement. And so that is basically what the quick suggestions are. The purpose of the quick suggestion is addressing those items only. Things like Akkermansia, we never had that showing up anywhere in any of our earlier analysis as being a significant bacteria because we are out of range. For Jason's ranges, they come in and we come up with suggestions. Again, this is a generic cookbook recipe of how to correct the microbiome without knowing that much more about what's going on. Our next way of getting suggestions is by using canned filtering, which is making use of the information which was being published by PubMed studies here, or in this case by Citizen Science, which is this site doing its own statistical analysis and identifying certain patterns and using that to subset the bacteria. And there's several ways of doing it. First, we're going to do it assuming we have done none of the other work. We're just going to take the whole microbiome in, apply it, the filtering, and see what comes up for suggestions. Okay, so let's go over there. Again, changing your microbiome is called advanced suggestions. And we have the ability to define things which we want. So we can define things by species level or whatever. Default is family, genus, species, and below. And what we're going to do is we're going to change restrictions over originally to autism PubMed studies. And that's it. Nice and simple. We have other options here, but let's just walk with the off-the-shelf suggestions. And what we have up here is the result of taking the whole microbiome, taking it through the reported things, and what we have is we have some agreement. We have lactobacillus is too high, is reported from the studies. Bacteria vulgaratus is too high, reported from the studies. We have other things which are marked as being too low, which we never detected on it, but then again we were largely focused on items that were high. And now we have down below, we have changes of substances to do it. We have the ramosis here, which I think we had in our earlier example. So flipping back to the earlier examples from Jason's things, we find ramosis sitting there. So it's also on the list as that one. And we have other things here. We have particular vitamins. We find T is there. We find lutein is there. Let's flip across. We find T is there. Lutein doesn't show up. But you will find there's a fair amount of agreement between the list, no matter how you go about it. You could resolve it by simply saying, okay, what is across the board on all of them, which is a valid way of doing it. Okay, so that was by using the PubMed studies. Now let's go through, and we happen to have citizen science studies being available. And what we're going to do is do the same thing and see what it comes up with. Again, we have T. We have a different probiotic showing up dominant. And and we have cloves and other things. We have neem. We also have things to avoid. Plantarum thing has been to avoid on several of them. Again, probiotic mixtures, unknown flavonoid foods. Again, we have folate showing up here. Let's flip to the prior one. And we have folate showing up here. And the original one, folate again. So we have consensus, picking different subsets of bacteria. We get a fair amount of agreement between them, which is sort of nice. It means that we're not totally random. So that takes us back to our presentation. And remember, the key thing is these are based on a group of people, and there's always a chance your child may not be a strong fit to that particular group of which was done there. They're always outliers. They're always the exception to the rule, the one who goes in the wrong direction. So canned filtering can be nice. It can make life easier, especially if you are easily saturated or don't know what. For autism, you have two ways of filtering, and you may want to do both of them. Print them out and just on your desktop, put them side by side and start finding out what is on both of them, what there's disagreement with, and getting some sort of safe list. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Now, we are now moved on to the hand-picked bacteria. Hand-picked bacteria are suspected to have the best results. Again, suspected. Personal belief, we are as focused as we can to specific bacteria, but again, there's a lot that we don't know. The decisions of what is in the hand-picked bacteria is based on specific logic. For example, abnormality in functions, too much of an enzyme, too little of an enzyme, abnormality of a lab results, and ideally, we have done everything by individual species, so we are at the finest level of easily available knowledge. And that knowledge won't get extended by the labs being able to go back down and identifying strains, because we need to have PubMed studies giving that information, and we just don't have that. Species is about as slow down as will get reported in studies on how a particular substance modifies the microbiome. Just as again a gotcha, we may run out of data to apply. We can describe what we want to have, but the problem is it doesn't exist at the moment, or the lab doesn't identify the species, or there's a bunch of things. We have big gaps in our knowledge, and what we have to do is work from there. Okay, so let's flip back and see how we do this on our sample page. So we're back here, and we go back to hand-picked bacteria, and there's a special link right here for hand-picked bacteria, which is handpicks suggestions. Click that, and now that is what is selected. You can, for example, go back here and says, okay, I want things to be done only at the species level. So anything which is at a genus level, we will ignore. We're only using the finest measurements. We click that, and we'll see what comes up. And there we have suggestion of things to do. We have barley, walnuts, licorice, etc. of all to increase, things to decrease, etc. And that is working strictly off the bacterial species. And through down bottom, let's check our old friend folate. Folic acid is there. Folate doesn't appear there, but barley, flaxseed, and walnut. You know, that sounds like breakfast every day for the kid. Guess what? You could have good old-fashioned barley porridge with flax seeds and walnuts for breakfast every day. And let's flip up and take a look at things. And but not with soy milk, with real milk probably. And we have the information there working at the bacteria level. And you notice we list out to ensure we have clarity, because if you print this off and you forget what you have done, you may forget which bacteria are in, and you print it off and you come back a couple hours later, print something else off, and you have a different list of suggestions. You say, what in the world's going on? Why did they change? Which I've gotten emails about. So I have gone and dumped everything up here. So this is everything that was taken into consideration. Let's go back and take a look at a couple of things. We have the ability to include things that modify child bacteria. For species, that doesn't help because generally that is the lowest level of information which we have. You can say include things to modify the parent bacteria, which we can try doing. Again, the magic solution for what you need to do is unknown. You have to experiment. And again, I try making life easy by going in, and then we go down, and again we see where the changes are. Frequently the changes are going to be relatively minor, other cases are going to be very major. So we can go in and experiment. We can go and alternatively say, okay, what we're going to do is we're not going to get the parents because we only have the parents sometimes. What we can do is change it up to genus and species, so it means that anything which we get the parent of a species, the genus, will get that one included, but only when the genus as a whole. But for individual species, we still keep them at a species level. So we are mixing, matching, trying to get a better match to what we know and see what the results are. Again, here we have things. We see lactobacillus shows up there now and everything else, and we are dealing only with things which are involved. And you will notice including lactobacillus does cause a fair amount of changes because lactobacillus is a very well documented one. Some of the other ones we don't have that much information about. So when you have the elephant walk into the room, the elephant takes up a lot of the space. So a lot of these space are going to be lactobacillus specific. Soil is something to reduce, iron is something to reduce, and down below we have positive impact, and we actually have a one lactobacillus which seems to reduce lactobacillus, or at least doesn't adversely affect it. And then we have Akimoto W, which is a fungal, which is unusual, coming out of Japan, been used there for many years. And it seems to have a real nice impact on it. So actually at this point in time, I think I'm going to go over and show you what it is. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on that to see what is in it. And what we find is, it contains Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is the same one the other two, and also contains a fungal here which has no apparent negative effects but may have some additional positive effect. In fact, it does have positive effects because just one probiotic by itself is only a 6.2 impact. The two of them together is 12.3 impact. So you can order it from Amazon. You can go to a variety of Japanese websites. You can get it on eBay, etc. I have a big bottle of it sitting around here too. And so you can go and get it and give it a try if it is suggested for you. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I don't often see that show up, but in this case, I'm quite happy that it showed up. It's sort of a good swing. And now we see items to decrease. Some of the items to be decreased may be things which by internet legend supposed to be always good for you. Keyword is always. It's not. Nothing is always good for you. So that will give you some things. Generally, the numbers here indicate probably priority. So you may want to start going down. Make sure you do elimination. And when you get low enough to go over to do the positive things, you can again modify the scope of things you are interested in doing it. For example, suppose you are interested only in, let's take a look. Let's just play around here. All that does is simplifies the list. I'm going to just leave it as that. Notice I'll always open it in a new tab so you can go and quickly reference one to the other. And we now go down and take a look at items to decrease, items to increase, and we find no particular thing. We do find some particular non-drugs which may be beneficial. Some of these things may be very hard to find. Aspirin isn't, but it has relatively low probability of having impact. The numbers here comes from the number of studies indicating that it helps versus and incorporating a number of studies that says it doesn't help. And we also factor in how many bacteria is likely to be impacted by it helping or not helping. So it is trying to get a single number to describe a complicated multi-vector surface, which is moving in time. And then down below, things which should be avoided. Again, we still have our little Japanese probiotic sitting there in the list. Okay, so we have tons and tons and tons of options. Most of the time, the results are going to be very similar. Sometimes they will be different, and the difference sometimes can illustrate some interesting things or something which, just because it impacts only one or two bacteria that we know of, may be interesting to explore. Okay, let's stop confusing you with all the options I have given you. I may give you a lot of options. So to recap, suggestion is play around a little bit, and once you think you have a couple of interesting sets of suggestions, print them up in hard copy, put them down on tabletop, and start working through them. First word is a key word which doctors will cite as part of their principles is do no harm. And what we have is KEGG data which may suggest probiotics that are based narrowly on a missing enzyme. Those same probiotics may have other side effects. As we saw in the earlier video, there was one compensating set of probiotics that includes plantarum, and plantarum is to avoid here, in which case you cross it off the list. You want to go through all the lists and try to do no harm. The suggestions are based on known shifts that they may cause, not will cause, but may cause. And the may is based on averages of a group of people, which means the certainty keeps going down. The PubMed clinical studies I deem to be less ideal because they are often based on a diagnosis. Some cases it's good, other cases it's going to be bad. For example, chronic fatigue syndrome or IBS. Often there are already known identified subsets of people with that diagnosis, and the studies often don't look at specific subsets, or only one study had ever been done with a subset, and that doesn't give us enough real information to work from. So unfortunately, I've had to aggregate them into a broader diagnosis. So the PubMed clinical studies are helpful. In this case, we saw that the results from them and the results from citizen science are all converging, which is good. And picking the path forward, as I said, print out things, put it on the tabletop, and start looking for consensus. These are things which is universally agreed we should be taking. When it comes to things you should avoid, the safest approach is avoid everything from all the lists, if practical, because you're dealing with children who sometimes can be a little irrational. As much as it's practical to take out, for example, removing chocolates from a kid's diet may have problems, especially if they're accustomed to getting chocolates from grandma. So these are suggestions, they are simply probability. So, okay, try reducing it a bit instead of eliminating it. Eliminating it may not do anything more. We don't know. All it knows it increases the odds of improvement a bit. If you are inclined to include something which is in conflict, once the kid becomes stabilized, try applying them one at a time for 2 weeks. Make sure you have some way to objectively measure what the effect is. And usually some way to objectively measure it. So 2 weeks before, record whatever you're going to measure, give it to the kid for 2 weeks, record the same measurements, and see if there are any changes. Again, we want to try to be objective, not subjective, especially since if we are stressed or busy, accurate memory usually lasts no more than 2 or 3 days. And if we're talking about 2 weeks past, forget trying to have an accurate memory. It is extremely rare. Remember, we are dealing with partial informations. Labs do not identify all the bacteria down to strains. Often I see 30% or more a bacteria group identified at the genus level where the strains are not identified. We in fact saw that earlier with bifidobacterium. We just don't have the detail of which type of bifidobacterium makes up the bigger classifications. Diet, supplements, etc. are often measured using the genus or family level, which means they tend to be very broad, and sometimes they're sort of overly broad and nice for studies, but won't necessarily help here. We can incorporate that information and we do have that information in the database, but it's less precise, it's broader. It may, if there's one particular strain we're trying to modify, we may be modifying all its siblings, cousins, second cousins, third cousins also, and that could cause us to go in the wrong direction overall. Diets, often there's advocate, you need this type of diet or that type of diet. The problem is every study I've read dealing with diet has the same problem. What is in the diet is very, very fuzzy. If you say, okay, I'm on a low carb diet, well, what food is in a low carb diet will vary from person to person, country to country, study to study. So we know that the specific food may be causing the effect, not the fact that you're low in carb, which means it becomes very uncertain what the real consequence of the diet is. So that trying to do things by diet, I view as less likely to have a good positive result unless you happen to luck out and you do a diet and happen to put the right foods on it. But I'd rather have you determine what foods you want to do first and then see if it meets the diet pattern and keep to those foods. So with that said, I think I'll finish off with a quick view over at this person's microbiome view, mainly to illustrate the fact that we are dealing with a large number of unknowns. here is what this person's sample is. This is all the different species reported. Here's the counts. So you add up all of those, and wait a minute, you don't get 14,000 from that series of numbers. There's a whole bunch of species which have not been identified by the lab, a big number. In this case, we barely have 1,000, so we have something like 95% of the bifidobacteria have not been identified. 95% are unknowns, which means what's going on? We don't know. We only can work from what the lab reports and what is reported in studies and PubMeds or from the Guild Encyclopedia of Genes and Genomics. If it's not in there, who knows? Okay, so hopefully this will help you. Needless to say, you probably have my email or my Facebook account, and just ping me if you have questions. I'll attempt to answer it in a reasonable length of time.